In 1980, Bill Kazmaier won the world's strongest man by 28 points, still the largest winning margin the contest has ever seen. 3 years and 3 titles later, the people who ran that contest simply stopped inviting him back, and to this day, nobody has given a straight answer as to why. That is the strange shape of this story. Kazmaier owns the first 3 years of the decade so completely that the footage almost stops being a competition, and then he vanishes from the biggest stage in strength for the entire middle of it. By the time he was allowed back in, the sport had grown up, gone international, and found a new star. The question worth chasing is what those missing years actually cost him, and whether the title of strongest man of the 1980s belongs to someone who was only permitted to compete in 3 of them. He was born on the 30th of December 1953 in Burlington, Wisconsin, the youngest of 4. The athletic ability showed up early, and it showed up broadly because he held school records in both the shot put and the 100-meter sprint, which is a combination that should not make sense in a body that would eventually weigh well over 300 pounds. Football was the obvious path, and it took him to the University of Wisconsin at Madison on a scholarship where he played fullback. He lasted 2 years and then walked away in 1974 to chase strength full-time. That decision looks visionary now. At the time, it was closer to insane, because powerlifting in the mid-70s had almost no money in it, no television, and no real path to a career. Sanctioned competition had only properly organized itself in the previous decade. A man could be the strongest human being on the planet and still need a day job. Kazmaier found his in Alabama. After some rough financial stretches out in California, he ended up in Auburn, working in strength research at Auburn University, and later for a barbell company, appearing at sporting goods trade shows and representing them at meets. In the early 80s, he opened his own place, the Kaz Fitness Center. So the man who would shortly be introduced on television as the strongest human alive spent a good part of that same period standing behind a booth talking to sporting goods buyers. His first real announcement to the wider world came at the 1978 Amateur Athletic Union National Championships in Los Angeles. Competing in the 275-pound class, still essentially unknown outside Wisconsin, he squatted 782 pounds, benched 534, and pulled 804 in the deadlift. That last lift is the interesting one, because he went into it trailing Dave Waddington by more than 50 pounds and closed the entire gap in one pull, tying for the class title and posting the biggest total in the meet. A first national appearance is supposed to be a learning experience. His was a warning. Around this time, he caught the eye of David Webster, the Scottish strength historian who would go on to become one of the founding figures behind the world's strongest man itself. Webster had judged Mr. Universe contests and watched top lifters for 4 decades. And writing in a bodybuilding magazine in 1979, he described being unable to quite believe what he was looking at. A man who could outmuscle the physique champions and outlift the world champions at the same time. He then told his readers that almost none of them would know the name Bill Kazmaier yet, but that they should remember it. Historians do not usually make predictions that clean, and they almost never get them right this fast. Within months, Kazmaier won the 1979 International Powerlifting Federation World Championship in Dayton, Ohio, with an 865-pound squat, a 622-pound bench press, and an 804-pound deadlift for a total just under 2,300 pounds. The bench was a world record. He was 25. What follows is one of the quieter but more telling details of his career, because for the next 18 months, the only man beating Bill Kazmaier's bench press record was Bill Kazmaier. The record had belonged to Sweden's Lars Hedlund at 612 pounds. Kaz took it to 617 in July of 1979, then 622 that November, then 633 in May of 1980. He kept walking it up in small increments like a man testing how much of the ceiling was actually there. That same year, 1979, 1 year before the decade this story belongs to, he entered the 3rd ever World's Strongest Man in Studio City, California. He led for much of the contest. In the car lift, he deadlifted a vehicle weighing 2,555 pounds, beating Don Reinhardt, who was the reigning giant of American powerlifting and the man everyone in the building had come to watch. And then he finished third, edged out of second by the narrowest of margins, which is the sort of result that either breaks a competitor or sets the next 3 years of his life in motion. It set the next 3 years in motion. Before leaving 1979 behind, there is one more thing worth mentioning, because it says more about him than any barbell number. He went to Scotland and competed at the Braemar Gathering in Aberdeenshire in front of roughly 25,000 people, with no specific training in Highland Games events, and threw a 56-pound weight over a bar at 16 feet and 2 inches for a record. Some accounts of that day garble the weight badly, so treat the exact figure with a little caution. What is not in dispute is that he also became the first strength athlete to press the Inverstone overhead, a lump of granite weighing 268 pounds with no handles and no forgiveness, a stone that Scottish strongmen had been failing to press for generations. He turned up as a tourist and rewrote the record books on the way through, so he arrives at the 1980 World's Strongest Man at Vernon Valley in New Jersey as a genuine threat. And the event list he faced deserves a moment of appreciation, because early WSM was gloriously unhinged. Alongside the log lift and the deadlift and the truck pull, there was a refrigerator race, a battery hold where competitors held 65 pounds out at arm's length until their shoulders quit, a steel bar bend, and an event listed in the official results as the girl lift. Nobody involved seemed to think any of this needed explaining. Kazmaier won 5 of the 10 events outright and tied for first in another. His final score was 102.5. Lars Hedlund of Sweden took second on 74. Geoff Capes, the British Olympic shot putter who would become his great rival, was third on 69.5. Reinhardt, the defending champion, was injured out of what turned out to be his final appearance, 28.5 points. 45 years and dozens of contests later, no one has beaten that margin. For context, modern World's Strongest Man finals are routinely decided by 2 or 3 points, and the whole appeal of the format is that the lead changes hands right up to the last event. Kazmaier had turned it into a demonstration. Then came the 31st of January 1981 at a small meet in Columbus, Georgia, the West Georgia Open, and this is the day that should be carved somewhere permanent. He squatted 925 pounds in wraps and a squat suit. He deadlifted 837, and in between those 2 lifts, he bench pressed 661.4 pounds, which is 300 kilograms, raw, with no bench shirt, in a t-shirt. He was the first human being to do it in a sanctioned meet. His total that day came to 2,425 pounds, 1,100 kilograms exactly, and that number stood as the world record for more than a decade. Understand what that means in a sport where records normally fall every few years. A man set a mark in a regional meet in Georgia in early 1981, and the entire international powerlifting community failed to catch it until the 90s. He was 27 years old, and he had not yet had a serious injury. That was about to change. At the 1981 World's Strongest Man, held at Six Flags Magic Mountain in California, Kazmaier tore his pectoralis major muscle during the steel bar bend. A torn pec is not a strain you compete through. It is a structural failure of one of the largest pressing muscles in the body, and it is the kind of injury that ends careers even now, with modern surgical repair and modern rehab. He had neither, so naturally, he went out and won the squat event with 969 pounds on a Smith machine, which stood as a world record for the movement. He also won the log lift at 360 pounds, the engine race, the keg load, and the silver dollar deadlift, where he pulled 940 pounds off 18-inch blocks, and then, apparently for his own amusement, did a second repetition with it. He finished on 96 points to Geoff Capes on 88. Capes had beaten him in the weight toss, the truck pull, and the bar bend, which is the closest anyone had come in 2 years, and Kazmaier still won going away while carrying a torn chest muscle. He never fully recovered from that injury. Every single thing he does for the rest of this story happens on top of it. The 1982 contest, again at Magic Mountain, gave him his third consecutive title, ahead of Canada's Tom McGee in second and John Gamble in third. He won the truck pull in 37 seconds, took the log at 370 pounds, won the weight toss, and tied Ernie Hackett in the silver dollar deadlift with 1,055 pounds, 91 points, comfortable. But the detail from that day that has stayed with strength fans for 4 decades is not any of those numbers. It is a footnote about the truck pull, and it concerns Geoff Capes, a man built like a municipal building who had thrown the shot at 2 Olympic Games and who would go on to win World's Strongest Man twice himself. Capes ran his truck pull and posted a time of 46 seconds. He was then permitted to run it again in a different lane, the lane Kazmaier had used, and he came in at 38 seconds, 8 seconds off his time by standing where Kaz had stood. There is a mundane explanation available, and it probably involves the surface of the course or the camber of the ground. But sit with the image for a second anyway, because it is a beautiful piece of psychology. The best strongman in Britain finishing his run, looking at the clock, looking at the American, and asking to do it again over there. That is what dominance actually looks like from the inside. Not a highlight reel, a rival quietly requesting different circumstances. And then, in 1983, the invitation did not arrive. No ban was ever announced. No press release, no disqualification, no failed test, no scandal. He had just become the first man to win the title 3 times, and 3 times in a row. And the following year, he was simply not on the entry list, and he stayed off it for the rest of the decade's middle years. The most commonly repeated explanation is the obvious commercial one, that a televised competition needs the audience to believe the outcome is genuinely in doubt, and Kazmaier had made that belief impossible. That reasoning is plausible. It is also, as far as I can find, entirely unofficial. Nobody has ever attached their name to the decision. What happened in his absence is genuinely worth knowing, because the sport did not collapse. It exploded. In 1983, Geoff Capes finally won the thing, becoming the first non-American champion in the event's history by edging out a 23-year-old Icelander named Jón Páll Sigmarsson by a single point and a half. Sigmarsson won in 1984, Capes took it back in 1985, and Sigmarsson won again in 1986. Between them, they turned world's strongest man from an American curiosity into an international television property, and Sigmarsson in particular, with his showmanship and his enormous personality, dragged the whole sport into a level of fame it had never had. There was no contest at all in 1987. Instead, the 3 of them met at a competition called Pure Strength, where Sigmarsson beat both Capes and Kazmaier, which is the first hard evidence on record that the hierarchy had genuinely shifted, rather than simply been rearranged by an invitation list. Kazmaier had not been sitting still, though, and this is the part that undercuts any suggestion he had declined. In 1983, the very year the snub began, he won the United States Powerlifting Federation National Championships in July, and then took his second International Powerlifting Federation World title in November. He did it with that unhealed pectoral injury, and, on top of it, torn hip flexors suffered in the squat shortly before the meet. In the year they stopped calling him, he was still winning world championships on a body that was falling apart. He also went looking for other stages. He won the World Muscle Power Classic, the Ligue Défi Mark X International in Canada, and the World Strongbow Championship, all of them contests built around raw static strength rather than television spectacle. He spent much of the decade chasing the old feats of the historical strongmen, the ones from the Bronze Era of physical culture, and became the first man to lift all 5 McGlashan stones, the graded set of spheres that eventually evolved into the Atlas stones every strongman contest ends with today. None of it aired on network television in front of millions. He finally came back at the 1988 World's Strongest Man in Budapest, 34 years old, 5 years removed from the last time he had stood on that stage, still carrying a chest that had never properly healed. He finished second. Jón Páll Sigmarsson won his 3rd title, and a young British miner named Jamie Reeves took 3rd, second place. In his first attempt back against a field that had spent half a decade evolving without him, in a sport that had moved on to new events and new athletes and a new center of gravity in Northern Europe. It is simultaneously the most impressive result of his career and the saddest, because it is the clearest possible evidence that he should never have been away in the first place. He returned once more in 1989 and finished fourth. That was the last time Bill Kazmaier competed at the World's Strongest Man. The honors came anyway. He is in the World's Strongest Man Hall of Fame and the International Sports Hall of Fame, sitting alongside modern champions like Brian Shaw and Hafthor Bjornsson. Across his career, he set around 40 world records between powerlifting and strongman. David Webster, the man who had told the world to remember his name back in 1979, called him the greatest American strength athlete there had ever been, and Webster was not a man given to handing out compliments he had not thought through. So where does that leave the argument? 3 World's Strongest Man titles, an 1,100 kilogram total that outlived the decade it was set in, the first 300 kilo raw bench in history, a 28-point winning margin nobody has touched since, and a rival asking to change lanes. Set against that, 6 years in the middle of his prime with no access to the only contest that could have settled anything, and a torn pec from 1981 that he carried for the rest of it. The verdict is not that he was unbeatable forever, because Sigmarsson beat him fairly in 1987 and again in 1988. The verdict is that we never got to watch the argument happen while both men were whole. One quick note for the record, since it sits outside this decade entirely. Kazmaier went on to a professional wrestling run with World Championship Wrestling in the early 90s and later helped design the Arnold Strongman Classic in 2002, choosing events built around the historical feats he had spent the 80s chasing. Both belong to different eras and different stories. The 80s belonged to a man who won every time he was allowed to show up and was then quietly not allowed to show up. Watch the 1982 truck pull footage again with that in mind, and see whether Geoff Capes changing lanes still looks like a footnote.